Thank you all so much for joining. Today we have Miss Danielle Winget. I hope I said that correctly. I will definitely hand it over to you to give a more proper introduction. But Miss Danielle Winget, this is part of our speaker series on environmental science. She is currently the assistant professor of biology at UC Claremont College. And so with that, feel free to take it away if you have any slides or just want to talk through, but I'm excited to introduce and hand it over to you. So let's all give a warm welcome to Miss Winchell.
Hi. Let me see if I can get some slides shared that I think one of the volunteers actually built a lot of this. And so I added some pictures that I have. But hello, my name is Dr. Danielle Winget, and I am an assistant professor of biology at Claremont College, which is a branch campus of the University of Cincinnati. And so most of the students that I teach these days are introductory biology and environmental science students. And my classes are applied science courses, in that we go out of the classroom and we are involved in the world around us. Because for us, that's the best way for us to learn, is that I can share information with you, like during this meeting, but for you to actually be able to use those skills and ideas, I need to take you outside and use them in the real world. And so a lot of what I do is called service learning projects, and my students and I go out and volunteer in our communities. And so that's how I got associated with this program. Is one of my students that was very inspired by this asked me to be a speaker for the series. I am going to talk a little bit about my journey and how I became an environmental scientist. And before I start, I want to mention that there are lots of different ways to enter environmental studies. And just because you didn't start in life with this love of the world around us like I did, doesn't mean that you can't do this. And I think that that's something important to remember as you hear about other people's stories, is that sometimes they're going to resonate with you. And you will be like, yes, that's me. Oh, and sometimes you'll be like, I don't see that connection yet. But the more that you hear people's stories, the more that you think about what it is that you like to do, the easier this process of deciding, which is where many of us find ourselves over and over again, can become. So I became interested in environmental studies when I was 5 years old, and I went to SeaWorld back in the day when going to SeaWorld was the coolest thing that you could do. And that happened to be the year that the first captive killer whale calf, a baby killer whale, was born at SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida. And so the whole park was decked out for this baby killer whale. And I fell in love. I was like, whales. Whales are everything. I had stuffed animal whales. I had stuffed animal bedspread. I had whales on my walls in all kinds of posters and art forms. And I had whale shirts. Like, it was whales for the next 15 years. And my parents constantly were like, how do you want to work with whales? Do you want to be a veterinarian? That is one of the, doctors that works with the whales at SeaWorld. And I was like, no, that sounds gross. And they were like, oh, do you want to be one of the people that talks about whales at SeaWorld and does this was back when we had whales that were trained to do all kinds of tricks and stuff. And do you want to be one of those people? And I was like, I hate talking in front of people. So no. And they were like, I think that really stumped my parents. And they were like, what can you do? And so I think they did some research and they were like, Danielle, you could be a marine biologist. And I was like, yes, that is exactly what I want to do. I loved science and I loved whales. And so I was going to be a marine biologist pretty much from first grade on. And so, as I said, it was whales all the time, everywhere. When I went to go to college, then I looked at marine biology programs and environmental studies colleges. And when I went into those fields, I very quickly realized that there were lots of great colleges for biology degrees and marine biology. And I ended up at Florida State University with a Bachelor of Science degree and a specialization in living marine resource ecology, if you want to string a bunch of words together that have an inscrutable meaning. Um, and I realized at that point that working with whales was a very specialized field, and that actually there were a lot more opportunities for me if I was willing to broaden my scope of interest. And that's when I got really more interested in ecology in general and environmental science in general. And what did it mean to work towards better management of the natural resources and world around us? And I realized that that was really what was motivating to me about whales is like I really wanted to save and conserve whales and for there to be whales for other people and future generations. And so there was a huge field of interest that I could work on that would not necessarily be with whales, but would help to build a healthy ecosystem that whales were part of. And so I ended up getting a Bachelor of Science degree, and then I went to graduate school where I actually worked with viruses. So the opposite end of the size spectrum for whales. I went from like whales is everything to viruses, the smallest kind of living entities on the planet are the thing I was really interested in. And my doctorate work is in the abundance and diversity of viruses in marine environments. That's how I stayed in marine biology and how they affect phytoplankton. And, phytoplankton are these microscopic plants that live in freshwater and saltwater ecosystems that do all of the oxygen production. They start photosynthesis and carbon cycling like plants do in land environments. And so, how viruses, which kill phytoplankton, just like we're all familiar with viruses killing human cells recently, how that affects their populations and nutrient cycling and oceanic food webs is what my doctoral work was on. From there, I did some postdoctoral work out at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. And that work led me all over the world. And that was something that I didn't anticipate from working in environmental science. Like, I thought I would be tied to a particular ecosystem and a particular organism, and I would live my whole life like Jane Goodall in one place, studying one type of organism. And actually, my career has taken me all over the world, from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. I've been on research cruises that were just looking at the surface of the ocean to ones that were in hydrothermal vent dives. I've been to places that are freshwater lakes that have strange microbial mats in them, all the way into deep mines in Mexico, looking for viruses in environmental studies. And through that, I've gotten to meet all of these really interesting people that I would never have done so if I had kind of stuck with that original view of what I thought this field of research would be like. While I was at the University of British Columbia, I had the opportunity to teach a class in sustainability and science for freshmen, undergraduates. And I was like, sure, why not? Because I certainly recognized that continuing with an active field career was not going to provide the like work-life balance that I was approaching. I had really little kids. I had like infant twins, and I couldn't go out 6 months a year in the field anymore. And so I started teaching science at the collegiate level, and I loved it. I was pretty good at it. It took some like gathering of skills, but I got to really enjoy that. And then my teaching career then has taken me from Vancouver to Seattle, and now I live in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. And so some of the pictures that you're going to see here today, we'll see if I can kind of advance them, are going to be from the Cincinnati area and feature some of my environmental studies students that I've had. I've been teaching for about a decade now. And as I said, I focus on environmental studies, ecology, and I teach introductory biology courses for majors and non-majors. And I think too that I certainly didn't think when I started out in Wales that I would end up getting to teach about all kinds of organisms as my career. As I mentioned earlier, I was terrified of public speaking when I was a student and even a graduate student. And now that is what I do all day, every day, is I stand up in front of people and I share what I know. And that for me has been very fulfilling and inspiring. Like that is how I can build healthy ecosystems is by sharing what a healthy ecosystem might look like, what some of our problems are, and how we can work to solve that and getting other people excited about this type of work. So I consider myself today an environmental scientist and a marine microbiologist, as well as a scientific instructor. What is environmental science? What does this field look like? It is really about interactions and interconnectedness. Um, we work in environmental science, we often say with living and non-living things, and that if we want to protect or are interested in what is causing problems for a particular animal or a particular plant, we can think about the redwood trees right now in California as one of these interaction places where we have a slightly endangered species, a threatened species, and how are we going to keep it going into the future? We have to know about that species, the living organism, but we also have to understand its physical and chemical environment. And what is necessary for it to live is going to be some stuff that seems pretty boring, like soil and rainfall. But then there's some other things that are involved as well, like what feeds upon or damages redwood trees. What other trees and plants are in the redwoods ecosystem? What are dependent upon the redwood forest in order for them to live? And so it's all about these interconnections between people and our environments. And in doing so, environmental science is at this really amazing intersection, I think, between what's going on around us and ourselves. And that interconnectedness is what has drawn me, I think, to stay in environmental science, is that by working in this field, we can actually have really big impacts on not only the things we care about, like viruses in whales and redwood trees, but then ourselves as well. And that makes it important. That makes it crucial and critical for us to be working in this field and to draw more folks into it and to be able to stay motivated and dedicated to it. And I think this interconnectedness and complexity here, we often think about it in terms that you have to understand the environment, but then you also have to understand the economics and the socio-political scheme. Is it mirrors real life. Like no problem in real life is simple and not interconnected to other things. And so for me, that acceptance that, hey, environmental science and what I work with is complex and interconnected, and there was not ever going to be an easy solution makes it easier to accept some of my own like real life problems. It's like, well, it's going to take a lot of work to work on that because there's all these different things that are interlinked and have cascading impacts on them. And so working with those types of problems in environmental science has really prepared me for some of my real life problems, which again, I didn't anticipate when I started down this. One of the things we often say in environmental science is that you can have the solution to climate change and how to extract excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to affect future climate impacts. But if that solution costs too much and is really difficult to utilize, it's not going to work. And it's this recognition that you can have a science solution in environmental science that still fails because you don't meet those economic, political, socio, contextual solutions as well. And again, it's that interconnectedness and interactions that are so important for us as environmental scientists. Um, what does it look like on a day-to-day basis for an environmental scientist? This is a picture of a colleague of mine at the edge of Appalachia Preserve. That's the guy in kind of the plaid shirt in one of the bottom pictures. And the students of mine that he has taken out in order to help transplant endangered lichen at this particular location. And so an environmental scientist is going outside almost every day. There are many environmental scientists, like including myself, like I work most of the time in a classroom, in a teaching laboratory, where we might be going outside once or a week, and sometimes as infrequently as once a month. But for many environmental scientists, they were drawn to this field because they wanted to be outdoors, because they were interested in the environment around them. And so that is one of the things that's kind of fundamental to being in environmental science. Does it mean that you have to like being outside? No. Does it mean you have to tolerate it? Yes. Some days it is not fun to be outside when it is pouring down rain, or if it's very, very hot, or there's lots of bugs, which happens in environmental science. But those experiences are what make the stories of your life that you get to share with other people. It's like I went out one day and I was sampling for endangered lichen, and it was really freaking cold, and my fingers almost froze off, but I still did it. It gives you that opportunity to meet problems and figure out how to overcome them in really like interesting and I would say like real world problem solving types of ways. Like it's when you go outside, it never goes as you planned it. And so you get some very on the job practical problem solving skills as an environmental scientist. A lot of what we do then is we go outside, we collect samples, we make observations of organisms around us, and we come back then into a laboratory setting usually, and we analyze data. We analyze these numbers, we analyze these pictures that we've taken. We write programs that allow us to be able to analyze video image that may be of an environment to count the abundance of particular types of organisms. We might be running surveys with people of how their behaviors and actions and how they interact with other people. And then you have to be able to come back and make some type of sense out of that information that you've collected. And that takes practice. It takes some literacy, we often say, with some of the basic math and science skills that you are learning now. And then the final step of this as an environmental scientist is to communicate what we have found to other people. Because again, you can have the solution to climate change, but if you don't tell anybody about it, is it really the solution to climate change? And so communication skills and interpersonal skills are also really important in environmental science in that we're working at this intersection between people and the world that they live in. And in order to, we have to be then willing to talk to each other as well as to the people who aren't environmental scientists in order to be able to communicate the information and findings that we found. I think, though, that the key skill to being an environmental scientist is to be curious. And that means that we're constantly asking why. And so, why do the lichen grow on these trees but not other trees? Why are the lichen going extinct in this location? Um, why did our transplants work or not work in this situation? This particular project with the lichen transplanting we did, I think in 2017. It was a long time ago. And this is an area that floods seasonally. And so Mark Zaloba, the guy in the bottom picture there, was just this last year able to go out and finally check on our transplants. And he was like, Danielle, they're growing. And so this was like very exciting, um, built upon his curiosity about this particular type of organism, what was affecting it, and then the curiosity of my students to go out and actually make meaningful change in the world around them, which was pretty cool. There's a whole bunch of job titles that you can have as an environmental scientist. But one of the things that I think is really important to think about if you're considering a career in environmental science is that there are several different ways that you can kind of parse out maybe where you should go and what you should be looking at. And in general, I tend to think of it as there might be these three zones of focus. Do you like to work with terrestrial ecosystems? The students in this picture are reworking a community garden in Price Hill in Cincinnati, one of our lower income neighborhoods. And the idea is to create green space and shade as well as local food production in a place that's currently a food desert when it comes to access to fresh produce and like there's not a grocery store within walking or biking distance of this location. Are you really interested in land questions, or are you interested in aquatic ecosystems and water? And that's where I came in. I wanted to work in marine biology. Or are you interested in atmospheric science, in climate, in weather conditions, in the flow of substances across ecosystem boundaries in the atmosphere? And that can be one way you can kind of figure out where in environmental science you might belong. Another way that I often think about it is what are you interested in? Are you interested in animals? Are you interested in plants? Are you interested in fungi? Do you like bacteria? Are you interested in people? A lot of these are going to be then scientists who are doing research on a particular organism in a particular environment. So, again, if you're like, I love the Grand Canyon, okay, what can you work on in the Grand Canyon? What types of questions do you have? How would you like to interact with this ecosystem? That can be a starting point in environmental science. But I also want to stress that You don't have to love the environment to be an environmental scientist. If you get really excited about making policy, about being in politics, there's also a role for environmental science there as well. And that we have all these laws about our environment, we have all these court cases about our environment. That takes knowledge of environmental science in order to write those laws, to enforce those laws, in order to be able to be a judge in those cases or an attorney for this. So, like, there's lots of ways that you can be in environmental science without having a scientist or biologist or researcher job title. And I think that that's also something that I didn't appreciate until I started really being on the biology researcher side was that like my research and information had no impact unless there was somebody on the other side that was working in policy and society and economics. And so again, like it's I always want to say, like, don't pigeonhole yourself. Like, again, I kind of did that when I was like Wales all the time. I was like, it has to be Wales. And then I was like, wait, there's not any jobs in Wales. And so what else am I going to do? So, like, be open to these different aspects and ideas. Another way you can think about it is that if you really want to work at a particular place, a particular organization or employer, that's another way to enter environmental science. So if most environmental scientists work either for the government, state, local, federal, international. These are the policymakers. These are our forestry specialists. These are folks that are working to create natural resource management plans, everything from endangered species to how do we mine and conserve this scarce mineral resource. These folks are working on, how do we manage tuna populations so that we have enough of those? And that's an international problem because tuna don't recognize national boundaries. And so that's one area where you can work is in government, and there are a lot of jobs there that will allow you to do either the basic science studying an organism, the policy side of stuff, or even the interaction side. If you want to work in environmental education, there's lots of government jobs in those areas. The second place that you might think of, oh, that's where I really want to work, is at a for-profit research institution. And so these are places like GE and 3M and P&G. These employers are also doing research and they have a huge interest in environmental science because they want to be more sustainable. They recognize that there are limited resources to make toilet paper. And so we need an environmental scientist to help us with that. We need an environmental scientist to help us monitor the types of pollution that we're creating and the impacts that we're having around us. And I kind of lump in university academic jobs, which is mine, in that category. That's again like this basic and applied research jobs are going to be either these private companies or universities across the globe. And then the third place that we see environmental scientists working are at nonprofit organizations. And that's what is happening here at Pine Hill and in the last slide at the edge of Appalachia. These are organizations that are really based in conservation and preservation of ecosystems and organisms. And they need environmental scientists to do those same types of things of education and outreach, basic research, data analysis, policy making sides, management. Like they also have these same types of jobs. It's just in a different setting. And they really run the gamut and are across the board. Um, what do you need in order to be an environmental scientist? Today, you need a bachelor's degree, which is a 4-year undergraduate college degree in any one of a variety of fields. Environmental scientist, I don't know anybody who considers himself an environmental scientist, I think graduated with the same degree. They really come from all over. And it tends to be a program where students often personalize what it is they're studying because they have this passion for a particular portion of environmental science. And then they end up going out there and working in it. Um, Bachelor's degrees can get you hired into entry-level jobs, but including myself, I have a doctorate degree in biological oceanography. Often a master's or a doctorate degree are needed if you want to earn those higher salaries. And I think that that's something to, consider is what is going to be something that supports you as you're moving forward in life. The students in the picture here are helping to tag migrating monarch butterflies as they move through the Cincinnati area in association with the Cincinnati Zoo program and a professor at the University of Cincinnati. And both of the students in the picture here actually returned to college after they already had some education and training in order to pursue environmental science, in order to get that kind of basic line of your resume that says, I have some training in this field, so that then they could get the job that they really wanted, that they found out that they really wanted to do. And I think that's also really important to remember is that you're going to be deciding and asked to pick something in the coming years about what you're going to do and where you're going to work. And it's okay to change your mind. Okay. Like you can come back, you can switch, you can specialize. That's okay. Our programs are built in environmental science is actually better when you have a broad background because you're aware of those interconnections already. And that complexity isn't something that becomes a barrier, it's something that you're excited about and that you accept. Um, how much money do you make? Yeah, that's a decent salary. I would say, again, this is Mark Zalova with the cap and the gray hair in the picture here, and a couple of my students. Mark probably makes this salary. I make close to this salary, but under it at a community college university teaching place. Most starting salaries are probably going to be less than this, and that can be one of the big dislikes about working in environmental science is like, it is not a high paying job. And it takes two incomes in my household in order for us to be able to live the life that we have. And that can be hard starting out. And that is something to keep in mind if you're like, I'm going to do this, is like, that's part of the passion of it, is because the monetary reward is not there. Now, what are the benefits of it? You get to do things like these guys are, which we're releasing an endangered wood rat into its new environment. These are a threatened species here in Ohio, and they're little, um, I would say, kind of like a cross between a mouse and a rabbit. They're rats because they have a long tail that doesn't have any hair on it, but they are not like your Norwegian rat that you would find in a city environment. They're native to Ohio. This particular organism was living in somebody's barn, and we wanted to move it into a normal cliffside environment in order to boost and maintain its population here. And so these students got to tag it this day, and they got to take a couple blood samples before they released it into the new environment. And so, like, that's the benefit of environmental science. You get to do really, really awesome stuff like that. Even though your compensation, like monetarily, might not be as much, it is very, very personally fulfilling. And you get to see the impact of your work right away. It is a job where you can be present every day. You can feel like you're making progress and change toward particular goals, whether it's research or society or economic wise. And then you can go home at the end of the day and live another life. And I think that's something that's really nice about environmental science too, is that there is that capability for work-life balance. And most of the folks that work in this field are very dedicated to that. They've chosen environmental science because it allows them to have work and other things that they find very fulfilling. One of the things to keep in mind is because you're outside, like we have been in all these pictures, it's a very physical job, and that it constantly is asking you to put your body and your mind into situations that you might not have prepared for. And that again can be very fulfilling, but it's something that is inherent to the job. As I mentioned, there weren't a lot of jobs in Wales. Some of the job opportunities in environmental science can be limited. And so it's really based around networking. And again, the students in the pictures that you've seen, we were able to use the network of environmental science and ecologists in our area in order to find them jobs and positions when they opened up. And so that's where the interpersonal skills become really important in this job as well, is that you do have to talk to other folks and be nice to them in order to then get that toehold that will get you the job opening when it's available at a particular organization, at that place you want to work with that type of organism that you want to work with. And that's something that maybe I didn't realize either when I started out, was that I really did need to be open to making lots of friends, which seems like an obvious thing to do, but I'm an introvert and it's not something that I do like naturally. And so I've had to work on that skill to the benefit of myself and my students then. Um, yeah. What I tend to think of too is, like, hey, if what is it that makes an environmental scientist? They're really solution focused. They want to apply the knowledge they've had so that they make meaningful change. And that motivation, that passion is what overcomes some of the disadvantages in these positions. And for you starting out, like how do you get started in environmental science? Certainly becoming engaged in your community is the way to go. In that if you practice environmental science now, when you're tasked to do this later in your undergraduate, academic career or at a job, you'll be like, oh yeah, I've done this, or I've done something like this. I know I can do this. You'll have that personal confidence to be able to move forward. Plus, if you volunteer in your community, like these are students that were volunteering on campus to help remove invasive honeysuckle, which is a really harmful plant species in our area. They got to know each other. They got to know other teachers. They got to know other community professionals that then they could get a job with, that they could volunteer with. This is how you start networking, is by kind of putting yourself out there. The other thing that I really like about volunteering and internships is that it lets you figure out what you like to do. Um, there was like one out of these like 15 students that came this day that was like, I loved this, Danielle. How can I do more of it? And I was like, cool, here's you go. Talk to this person. Most of the students were like, yeah, I don't ever want to do that again, Danielle. And that's also good. You can like check that off your list of like, nope, that is not what I like to do. And volunteering gives you these little one-off opportunities to try something and see if you really like it. And if you do, then you can pursue it. And if you don't, you can be like, okay, don't have to do that again. And that's something that I had some advantages of when I was also for looking into marine biology as a high school student is that I did try a variety of different things. And I was like, yeah, marine biology is where I really want to be. There wasn't anything that I was exposed to when I did summer camps or little volunteering opportunities as a high school student that I was like, no, this isn't what I want to be doing. Um, so again, those volunteering opportunities can really get you connected with the professionals so that they're waiting for you to graduate and give you a job. They'll have made a position for you. Internships is something that I also really encourage in that you can volunteer, but that's a big time investment that you don't necessarily get anything out of. And so if you can do an internship that's paid, that gives you job experience as well as financial support in order to keep doing the thing that you're passionate about. These are some resources of places that offer internships as well as volunteer opportunities in my area, but you can certainly look for similar ones in your areas. And that's what I would really encourage you to do next. And communicating, talking to people, sending me an email after this so that I can find someone in your area that I know that you can get connected to is really important. In this particular picture, these are some of my ecology students, and we went out to the Cincinnati Nature Center and we were assessing plant biodiversity in areas that they had done a prescribed prairie burn in versus places they had not allowed essentially like a forest fire to propagate. And like, do you get better biodiversity when you allow fire or not? And those are again the types of questions and things that you can answer with environmental science and some of the different types of techniques and things that you get to ask questions and find answers to. Okay, I think that was it. Hope I didn't talk too long. Do y'all have any questions? I will open chat.
Thank you so much. I thought that that was extremely informative. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I meant to start with that. That thanks for inviting me today. I always love to, I don't often talk about myself. And so I was a little nervous.
No, you did fabulous. Thank you. So I'm going to open it up. Anybody have any questions on here? If not, I can always start, but I want to open it up to the group first. Nathan, Sarah, Sumi, Jajasvi. Okay, so I'll open it up. I'll start off. So I think, you talked a lot about how you do, depending on what project you're working on, you're really doing something every day. Could you walk us through maybe 2 days, one day where you're really doing one thing and what that looks like, and then maybe an opposite day where it feels completely different and what are you doing on that day? I want the students to kind of hear what they can expect from a daily experience.
Sure. So one of the situations that comes to mind is that I was able to be on a National Geographic trip to Nica, Mexico, in order to go down in a lead zinc copper mine there in order to look for viruses and bacteria in very old water that had been like underground for thousands of years. Like what types of things live there versus what do we like interact with on a daily basis was the comparison. And so one day, we got all suited up and we went down in the mine and we collected water samples and it was hot and it was dirty and you were covered in mud at the end of the day. And you had, I mean, we collect water samples that are everywhere from just a couple milliliters to like 50 gallons of water. One of the places that we went into had these giant crystals of sodium selenite on the walls, and it was like 100 degrees and 100% humidity, and we could only be in there for 15 minutes. It was like very physically straining. And then the next day, we were in the laboratory in air conditioning, filtering water in order to be able to get samples to look at viruses and bacteria. And so you're literally sitting on a stool watching water go from one bucket to another. And it's like they seem like at odds with each other, in terms of like, did I really just do that yesterday? And then the next day you're like, what am I going to do tomorrow? If that is like the sequence of events in this particular research thing, like what the heck is going on? Um, and then the third day, you're looking at the samples, you're on the microscope taking pictures of the samples that you found. And then the fourth day, you're analyzing that data and creating graphs, comparing different samples to each other. And so, and then maybe if you're lucky, you get to go start all over and go to a different location. So that's, again, you get to use this just immense set of skills.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Because I think it's really important for them to kind of hear the different environments. Sometimes they think their whole world might be out in the field, or sometimes they might think their whole world is in a lab. And the
Nope.
ability to be able to either be passionate about both or passionate about one, but be able to, the other one being worth the first passion, I think is important.
Yes, and I would even say that, my daily work now as a college professor, some days I'm all day, 8 hours a day in the laboratory with students and we're running experiments and collecting data. The next day I'm in committee meetings with my colleagues about how to run the university. And so that's possible because of my choice to be in environmental science and the career path that has led me to.
Thank you. Okay, so I do have a question from Sumi in the chat. Now it's a little engineering oriented, so let
Mhm.
me know. But Sumi asks, could you share information about the professional engineering exam on environmental engineering?
Sure, and I meant to mention this that there are, we tend to think about environmental science from this environmental science program. You can go to college for those types of degrees, but environmental scientists run this gamut from, again, like human resources based all the way through what we think of as classical research biologists and scientists to engineers. And environmental engineering is a huge field where we have folks that, are actually doing the building and design of our communities, and they're doing it in a sustainable fashion. And so it's pretty enormous. I don't know directly about the PE exam for environmental engineering, but for most students, as they are going to go into their specialization, they're tasked with taking some exam, kind of like the ACT or the SAT, but it's more specific. And so there are often very specific practical questions that these exams ask. And particularly for these engineering exams, this is order to get licensure in order to be able to practice as an engineer in that particular field. And so it's similar to like there's usually like written as well as oral portions to it, where you write answers to very specific questions in order to demonstrate your knowledge for that. And similar to what a doctor would go through, and their medical board exams, or what we would see that attorneys do in order to get that license in order to practice law. That's just the exact same thing that we see for engineers and architects. If you're just going to be like a biologist in environmental science, you'll take one of those when you enter grad school, and then you'll get that master's or doctoral degree as that kind of final exam to be able to practice as that particular career profession.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to open it back up. Any other questions, you all? And I have some more as well. So I don't want to keep you too long, but just want to make sure that we get to all the questions.
I would say that in thinking about these types of exams too, I know Sumi went off just now, but like they happen at different points during your career. And sometimes they happen at the end and as you're graduating from 4 years, and sometimes they happen later after you've done another 2 or 4 to 6 years of study and work preparation.
As a new person interested in this field, what advice would you give yourself from in the past before you got into this field?
Oh man. I think that if I could talk to just about to enter college Danielle, I would tell her that there are more opportunities out there than I thought there were. Just because I envisioned environmental scientist as someone who was out in the field collecting data, studying organisms, that wasn't the only thing that I could be. And that again, I definitely feel that I had too narrowed my focus about what I thought I was going to be in life. And I wasn't allowing myself that opportunity to grow and change as I continued to grow up and mature. I thought I was done and I had picked, and that was the end of it. And that was the only thing that was going to be fulfilling for me. And it turns out there was a whole bunch of stuff that was equally as exciting and fulfilling as what I had originally picked. And so it's that recognition that you can decide to do something different, that you don't have to just do the thing you told your high school counselor you were going to do. Or that maybe he's told, for me, it was like I told my parents I wanted to do this thing, and they were like, cool, we'll help you do that. And it was like, I wanted to go back several times and be like, will you still support me if I decide I want to do this?
No, I like that because I think, we talk a lot with the students around how do you find what makes you passionate? And usually I find with students, they do one of two things, which is they pick one thing and then anchor onto it for a long time, or they go down the phase of I don't know for a long time.
Right.
And so for you, just to kind of help students, I think maybe who are in either of those phases, what did you find amongst all the things that you wound up being passionate about? What do you think was the common theme for you that made you passionate about all the different things?
I would say I certainly have been able to stick with these different things. The thread that connects them all is that I can see that I'm helping, whether it was I was helping understand the world around us. I was helping the grad students when I was a postdoc, that I'm assisting my students to become themselves in another form. That's what drives me. And it took, I think, until 3 years ago for me to like be able to identify that was the common thread. So again, we're looking at like 25 years of a career before I figured it out. And again, I think that our view is that you should figure it out sooner, but most of us figure it out later, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Any last questions for Dr. Winget? All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. Thank you for the
But
conversation. You definitely made me wish I could go back and do some environmental science.
you
So I
can.
feel passionate about it just from your presentation. I really want to
Great.
I started Googling
Oh, good.
to volunteer so I could, just
Excellent.
try and do some other things as well. But you're right, your passions do change and you always find new loves, which I think is great too. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. With that, we'll go ahead and close out for the day. And I wish you all a great rest of your Saturday. Thank you.